Good afternoon. I request you all to please occupy the front seats. And a warm welcome to everyone present here. I am Deepa from the Department of Liberal Arts, Humanities and Social Science. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today as we explore the ruminative topic of urban caste life. This talk will be an enlightening journey through the complex social dynamics and fascinating customs that define the unique experiences of those living in the urban caste. The caste system has its roots in ancient India dating back thousands of years ago. It was originally based on a person's occupation and evolved to encompass religious, social, and economic factors. As urbanization took hold and cities grew, the caste system continued to play a significant role in the society. Despite the advancements in modern society and the increasing intermingling of people from diverse backgrounds, urban caste life remains deeply ingrained and continues to impact the life of those living in urban areas. Taking into consideration of Bangalore, there was a time as recently as the 1930s when migration to the big city was the last option. In the past 85 years, Bangalore has grown from a small administrative town to a big industrial city and to a large post-industrial metropolis. It is a preferred destination of not only people from within Karnataka but across the countries. Of these migrants, there has been an indispensable influx of people of lower caste seeking not only employment but a better, more humane existence in an anonymous city. What are the ways in which caste was transformed but not eradicated in the planning document and in the spatial practices alike? What in short was the urban life of caste? To dwell deeply with some of these unresolved questions, we have with us a renowned personality, Dr. Janaki Nair, who has extensively worked in this field for several decades. Janaki Nair was Professor of History at the Center for Historical Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University until her retirement in January 2020. Her books include Women and Law in Colonial India, The Promise of Metropolis, Bangalore's 20th Century, and Mysore Modern, Rethinking the Region Under the Princely Rule. She has published widely in national and international journals and has served on the editorial boards of Journal of Women's History and Urban History. Dr. Nair has also held visiting appointments at University of California, Berkeley, University of Würzburg, Germany, German Historical Institute, London, and Azim Premji University, Bangalore. Without taking much of your time, let us invite Dr. Janaki Nair.
Let me begin by saying how honored I am to be invited by this young, very young university to participate in this important event. And I would like in particular to thank the faculty, Dr. Girish and Dr. Swati Shivanand, for inviting me to give this particular talk. Professor Shiva Prakash's lecture and the musical performance, these are difficult acts to follow. And I know that I stand between you and lunch. So it's even more of a challenge. But so let me not delay things too much. I have a PowerPoint here which I'm just going to follow. I am also grateful to Mahe for inviting me here because, as you know, the professional historian is today one of the most beleaguered persons in our emerging canvas because claims to history are being made by a very wide range and variety of people. So I really feel humbled and grateful that I have been invited to this event today. Let me repeat a proverb which was cited in the Census of India report of 1931, the report on Mysore, which said, a proverb in Kannada says, after the ruin, go to the city. It means that a man who has lost his property in the country and can make no living there.
Before we start today's session, I would like to request Dr. Animesh Bahadur to lead the panelists to the dais. Welcome to the 4th annual mi.l.a.p. festival, I am Vishal Vanjani, pursuing B.Tech in Computer Sciences. Today's panel discussion explores the social, economic, and spatial inclusions of migrants in the city. Bangalore, the cosmopolitan hub, the numero uno when it comes to the Industry 4.0, is the pride of the nation. The city creates its spaces for migrants with its savviness in the tech industry and a high level of acceptance. However, any intermixing of cultures has its challenges, and Bengaluru has its own share. The city of the legendary Kempegowda has been built as much by the migrants right from the 16th century as it has been built by the older residents. The migrants defined the city for themselves. What role has the state and the society played in managing this thriving plural society, and how does the pluralism maneuver the challenges of ever-increasing demands? On behalf of the organizing committee, we extend our appreciation for your presence today, and I'm glad to inform this panel discussion explores these pertinent questions. The panelists for today's discussion are Professor Madhu Veera Raghavan, Dr. Kalpana Gopalan, and Mr. Romal Laisram. Along with our moderator, Dr. Animesh Bahadur. Professor Madhu Veera Raghavan is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Mahe Bengaluru and MLHS. He is a doctorate in finance with almost 20 years of global experience. He has published over 50 papers in international journals and has presented his work in top conferences in finance and accounting. He has been ranked in the top 10% of the authors around the world by the Social Science Research Network. A warm welcome to you, sir. Joining him is Dr. Kalpana Gopalan. She is an IS officer with over 32 years of cross-sectoral work, which is diversified in many areas. She has broken barriers and found synergies between governments, corporates, and non-profits. She has field experience of over decades in urban governance and education. She has been trained in policy design from Harvard University and has been regarded as one of the best doctoral candidates in the past decade for her research on infrastructure in public-private partnerships. She has been awarded many citations and commendations from numerous prestigious universities. A hearty welcome to you, madam. Joining them is Mr. Romal Laisram. He is a proud writer, diversity and inclusion trainer, journalist, and an LGBTQ activist. He also dabbles in theatre, dance, and music. He is the founder of the queer arts movement in India, and he has also been a lifestyle journalist with over 15 years of experience in the fields of lifestyle reportage and publishing. He currently works as the assistant director with Indulge at the New Indian Express, Bangalore, and takes immense pride in being a migrant with roots in both Manipur and Tamil Nadu, and calls Bengaluru his home. A pleasant welcome to you, sir. The moderator for this session is Dr. Animesh Bahadur. He has worked in the field of academics for 20 years, and he has also worked for a couple of years in journalism. He has published multiple papers and research reports. His expertise mainly lie in labor laws and cross-sectional management. Please welcome our panelist and moderator with a huge round of applause. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. And without much ado, we will start with the panel discussion. The format, as far as possible, would be to allow the audience to ask questions also. So please feel free if you have a question in between also. We will not wait till end for people to ask questions, okay? So that's the first thing. Now, let me just, in brief, ask something to you. I'm just using the census definition since I have one finance person and one bureaucrat with me. So let me just give you the census definition. What census says is, census standard says that migrant is anybody who has lived in a place other than his or her place of birth. The second thing, this person has changed the location. So if you are in Bangalore right now, previously you were somewhere else, and now you are in Bangalore. So you will be called a migrant in Bangalore. So these are the two typical measures of being a migrant. So how many of us would qualify? Those who are residents here. in Bangalore, how many of us would qualify as migrants? I do. Well, that's the telling point about Bangalore or any of the metropolitan cities we are talking about. We are talking of creation of a great culture, a great environment by coming together of many communities, many streams, and many ideas. And that's why we are talking of cities built by migrants. It's nothing new. It has always been the case. Well, coming from a typical radical Marxist background, we did have a lot of critique, which we have heard in the last 2 days also. The critique that, for example, as Dr. Devi was saying, that metropolitans are like the belly. They burn the fuel, right? Then there is this critique which Dr. Inamdar was talking about. Going to a metro city is like Gokul Gaman. Well, yes, it does happen. There is no denial of that there are those factors which are happening. Every metro which is built, every cosmopolitan place which is built on a lot of perhaps losses, a lot of uprooting. But does that mean that the spaces we live in, the urban spaces we live in, are typically not social? And since the title is such, spatial, social, and economic inclusion, I have deliberately removed the term inclusion there. Well, there can be a debate, NS level debate. There could be thinkers like Lafiba who talk about the simple fact. I mean, that's where this whole idea comes from. That the whole idea is that when you are in an urban area, you are being oppressed or suppressed to be a part of it. You don't have the agency. You don't have the chance to work on it. You can't change it. And that's why reclaim our cities, as David Harvey says, right? So those are the ideas which are prevalent. But, well, the first thing is, are we oppressed? If we are all oppressed, why are we here? Is the oppression in a city very qualitatively different from an oppression in a hinterland or a village? Are there social situations where power does not play out? Well, there are those questions. And going with that is that question, who is a migrant? Well, that's why this is a very badly clicked picture because I have clicked it. But just in reflection of what we are talking about. So this, as you can make out, it's the Bull Temple. If you look at its entrance, it's very open and it's giving access to everybody. But in front is one person standing there, and I was so angry he's standing there when I wanted to click the picture. And when he spoke, I realized he's from a neighboring state. The state I come from, a neighboring state. As you know, neighbors never like each other. So I connected my hatred to the fact that he comes from that particular state. Just next to it, if you know, go to towards right, there were people selling some things and speaking in 3 languages. Kannada, Hindi, and of course English, because there were a lot of foreign visitors. On the other side, there is the shoe rack. There was one hawker selling toys there at the shoe rack. And as he spoke, he was having some major trouble. He came from a very backward region of India, and he was having very major trouble. Since I knew the language, I couldn't understand. He's suffering with that. Well, there is somebody who's showing their resilience by learning so many languages and surviving in the city. There are some people who have come and they are developing their resilience. And there are some like me who, in spite of being migrant, are creating a hierarchy of migrant, that I am a higher migrant and somebody else is a lesser migrant. So the way we look at migration, sorry I'm taking a lot of time, but the way we look at migration simply looks at the fact that we are not looking at people who have moved. We are also looking at the people about, in the sense of what is their power, what is their agency. Many of those things come out, and that's why these are places where you have a chance to express and you also to perhaps show your power. Urban spaces are not always negative spaces. If they were negative spaces, Bangalore would not be the zenith of civilization. It's like saying Harappa is great, but please remove the Indus Valley trade from it. Well, that's not possible. They go together. If trade was not there, Mohenjo-daro would not have been there. If business was not there, it would not be there. Yes, many of the locations in Bangalore are pete, maybe a market. But market has created our existence. Yes, capitalism has its challenges, but capitalism also makes us liberal. So that's where we are looking at the fact that a lot of people are coming together, creating a city, and that's where our discussion is bound to start. So my first question to all three of you is, starting from the points I was just raising, who would you define as a migrant? So,
but officially I was announced as Romal Laishram, and in that itself is where my story as a migrant begins, because I come from a really mixed family. I'm Manipuri on my dad's side, I'm Tamil and Malayali on my mom's side, and my Tamil origins are from Bangalore, but are highly contested, as everyone knows about Tamil identity in Bangalore, which is a hotly debated identity. But I was born a migrant because my mom identifies as South Indian, and all of us know South Indian traditions, we are born in our mother's houses, and I was born in Manipur. Not in my dad's town, but in some other town where he is not considered a local. So technically I was born as a migrant, and I've lived that migrant identity all through my life. I started my education down south in Ooty, and then I moved to a city like Bangalore. And while I holidayed in Bangalore all through my life, every single summer holiday and winter holiday, there was always one part of me that felt it was home. There was also one part of me that didn't feel it was home. And that's because I come from a super fractured identity of what Bangalore means to us. So let's start from the very beginning. When we talk about Bangalore as a city made by migrants, we're not just saying that to make it sound cool. If you really look at the city of Bangalore, and I would like to use two alternative terms, Bangalore versus Bengaluru, two different cities that now are kind of forcefully amalgamated into one identity, which is the identity of Bengaluru. But if you met my mom's generation, and I've had family in Bangalore for the last 6 generations, we go back in Bangalore way back to 1870, 1860, somewhere there. And the people who came to Bangalore that time from my family weren't Tamil or Manipuri, but Malayali, who moved from northern Kerala into Bangalore. And the reason being the cantonment was such a thriving business area. The Britishers were bringing a lot of people here for trade. A lot of people used it for a different kind of migration. While we talk about migration in terms of geography, often you also have to understand migration is also economy. And a lot of people were escaping, the vagaries of the caste system and coming to a city like Bangalore where nobody knew where you came from. Nobody knew the caste you belonged to. Nobody knew where your origins lay. But you came to a city where the British really cared about you making money for them. And so it was an equalizer of sorts. So I come from that kind of a background. And over the years, as like when I talk to my grandparents, when I talk to my grandaunts, even the generation like my mother and aunt, they have such different versions of what Bangalore is. To give you a simple example, a Bangalorean like me today will go to Malleshwaram, eat at Veena stores, go to Raghavendra stores, enjoy the semia there, those kind of things. And I would put up a picture, and I'd get a call from my mom immediately, who identifies as a strong, proud cantonment woman. Yeah, and she'll pick up the call and be like, "We don't get dosa in Fraser Town. Do you really have to go to Malleshwaram?" And for a long time when I was growing up, I was like, what is the problem? It's one city. Why does it matter to you whether I'm eating in Malleshwaram, Baswangudi, Fraser Town, or, my hometown, which is Benson Town? It never made any sense to me. But then I realized how our identities are so stuck with these geographical locations within the city. Like my mom, for example, will still refer to everything beyond Alsur Gate as Pete. And I have relatives in Pete who will refer to everything on this side of the city as cantonment. The people of cantonment will only use the word Bangalore. Even if you pay them otherwise, they will never say Bengaluru. The people of Pete will only use the word Bengaluru and never use the word Bangalore. And so while we are one city, we're really divided by how we look at this one single city that we're trying to propagate and promote as this super megapolis in today's time, which has one identity, which really doesn't. So often more than not, as someone who dabbles in cultural theory, who loves to look at cultures and the way they change over time, I'm always left with this one question of who is the original Bangalorean. We push a lot of the identity of Kempegowda right now, Kempegowda 1 and his family. We're going very much like Maharashtra, and now everything in Bangalore is going to be named after Kempegowda. I thought it was tiring enough when you went into Bombay and everything was Chhatrapati Shivaji, but now that's happening in Bangalore too. I'm not complaining about the thing, but something that people often choose to forget when they talk about Kempegowda is Kempegowda was a migrant too. Today, we're standing in a part of Bangalore which was not considered Bangalore for a very long time. We're in a place called Yelahanka. And Yelahanka was a kingdom on its own, ruled by a completely different set of kings who didn't really look after Bangalore because a large part of Bangalore came under the Mysore Maharaja or under the cantonment. And Kempegowda was from here. He was a chieftain from here who then went there and built the Bangalore fort. He was considered an outsider there. When he built the fort around KR Market, he was considered an outsider. He was not considered a local person. And so when we talk about these politics of who is an outsider, who is an insider, what is a migrant population, you often realize that the amount of importance you need to give to the idea that Bangalore is built by outsiders is really a lot. It really is something that we have to understand, that this city, this big city, was really not home to anyone. Today, we take a lot of things for granted. Like, for example, if I tell you, okay, who lives in Malleshwaram? A lot of you will be like, yeah, Basangudi, Malleshwaram, largely Kannadiga Brahmins, Tamil Brahmins. Almost all of them came from elsewhere. You talk about the areas like Madiwala, Koramangala. Koramangala at one point of time was 80% Telugu. And almost all of these Telugu people came from elsewhere. HSR layout today is a majority of Telugu. Even today, 90% of the people who own land are Telugu. Like that, different parts of the city are still big pockets of people who've come out from other places and made Bangalore their own. Today, because of the politics, the fact that we are in the state of Karnataka, we are the capital of Karnataka, and yes, the identity is Kannada and will largely continue to be so. But does that mean we ignore all of these other parts? Does that mean we refurbish history to our benefit? Does it mean we ignore the fact that the oldest temple in Bangalore, which is in Begur, next to Bomanahalli, was a Chola temple? Do we ignore all of these things to kind of fit into this narrative of what we're trying to propagate of Bangalore being a Kannada heartland, Bangalore being a part of Karnataka, which is all true. It is today. But does that mean we ignore the fact that the city was built largely by, migrant populations? Many parts of the city till date give you these examples of where these people came from, what they contributed to. Like, how many of you all know that Madiwala is named after the washer community? And a lot of those washer people came from elsewhere. How many of you all know that at one point of time when Bangalore came out of the British area, MG Road was controlled by just one Mudaliar family. And the Mudaliar family got MG Road basically because they were in the oil business. And when the British left, they had enough money to buy those big plots of land at dirt cheap rates. Because MG Road at that time was just a parade road where people just marched up and down. So there are lots of these stories, and I can go on for hours and tell you about every community in Bangalore and every part and where the history lies and what it's all about. But I think what I would like to leave you all to start this whole conversation is, if someone is trying to tell you that a city like Bangalore has native people versus non-native people, I would like to rubbish that claim. There is no such thing as a native of Bangalore and a non-native of Bangalore. Everyone is relatively either older or newer, but across the timeline, there are very few people who can actually claim that the city is theirs.
So I moved into Bangalore city, on the 3rd of April. If you want to call somebody moving interstate migrant. So I moved from Manipal to Bangalore. For me, there are multiple definitions, but perhaps I will stick to one, which basically says that a migrant is somebody who has moved away from their habitual place of residence. Voluntary, involuntary, independent of the legal status they have, they move to a place. You can probably call them as a migrant. Probably I'll keep some more remarks later on when we talk about what makes Bangalore so special, and I'll probably draw from Ganesh Devi's talk yesterday. But 2 or 3 things I quickly wanted to tell. First was that I was born in Bihar, grew up in Lucknow city. I'm a Tamilian by birth, but was married to somebody from Bangalore. So I had to learn the language because my ex was from this place. So I learned Kannada. My kids could speak fluent Kannada. I speak fluent Konkani. But I can now speak very, very good Kannada. But I thought the language was something phenomenal for us to sort of break whatever differences you have. But I'll reserve more comments on why Bangalore is a very, very special city. And I agree with Romal about this native versus non-native. I don't think it holds any substance anymore when 50% of the city is run by migrants. 50%. I think in Animesh's opening comments, it said 42 or 46. I was reading the more recent reports, almost 50% are migrants in Bangalore city. It's a phenomenal city. But I think Kalpana will have more to say, given that she had long years of sort of, bureaucratic experience. I'm also filling in for somebody else. Let me also confess that. I was a substitute player, 12th man. I'm a migrant here also. In every sense of the word, I'm a migrant today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, as both of you were speaking, I was thinking, why is this discourse, let us say about Udaipur or about Lucknow? And at the heart of that lies the fact that Bangalore is a city of migrants because Bangalore is so welcoming. And Bangalore is, we have migrants in a very broad sense of the word.
Done.
Both of you have spoken about and Dr. Animesh has spoken about. You're able to hear me? Or shall I come there? In which Dr. Animesh said, where all of us are migrants, many of us are migrants, and in the a narrower sense where we look at migrant workers, those who actually physically constructed the Vidhan Saudha, the city. This kind of discourse is much larger about Bangalore than I have seen about any other city, even close by cities like Chennai, which supplied so many of us to Bangalore. I think all three of us have some Chennai connection. So there is a cosmopolitanism in the heart of Bangalore city. And I think not enough credit, we speak a lot about migrants, not enough credit is given to residents of Bangalore, the original residents of Bangalore, my husband's family being one, who have opened their hearts and opened their markets and opened their offices to all of us, to live and play and work and wander in. And in a very, very, in a kind of metaphorical sense, Bangalore is a safe space for everybody, much more than any other. You don't feel a hostility on the street. Even if there's a slight, someone asks, the biodata from a tenant, Bangaloreans are aghast. You wouldn't find, you will take it as natural that you won't even get a home in some other cities. But here, I don't know if you have noticed the recent debates that, the house owner, landlord is asking for my LinkedIn profile. I thought that was very savvy of him, very sensible of him. You'll, probably put your best foot forward in LinkedIn. And so he did the right thing to ask. So I feel that, one thing is that, Bangalore is a safe space. There is a cosmopolitanism inherent in the Bangalorean. And which is what makes migration possible, which is what makes for all of us to be able to live and work here. So I think I'll stop with this now and maybe go into
presentation. So one very important aspect of migrant issues was what we handled 2 years back. So Professor Kalpana will also show how is the view from the subaltern side, how is the view from the perspective of the migrant who perhaps is not as resourceful as perhaps we sitting here could be. So if you want to
do it. Let me come to the... It's...
Yeah.
I can see the screen. I don't think we'll block that. You don't see the screen, right? Yeah.
I think I better go there. Okay. Policymakers' point of view or the bureaucrat... as he not very flatteringly called me. I am now no longer a bureaucrat. I am professor of practice, may I remind, working for you, Dr. Madhu. But from the government point of view, this whole term migrant didn't exist for a very long time. I've been in government 35 years, and for a very long time we didn't really use this word in normal parlance, government speak. It's only in the later years, it was more part of academic discourse. And therefore you will find that you do have a few programs specifically targeted towards migrants, particularly migrants' children in education, bridge schools for migrants' children and so on. But by and large, migrants are part of the larger population of the clientele who are workers. So that is something that, let us, I want to upfront make that, clarify that, and then deep dive into this presentation, because many of these questions which Dr. Animesh had raised and with which my fellow panelists have spoken about, they are thrown into sharp relief in the last 2 years that have gone by when we had the pandemic. So this whole question of how something like a crisis affects one section of the population, whom we today call by that broad, classify under that broad idea of migrants. And when here I speak of migrants, I speak of migrant workers, not people like you and me, but people who are actually and horrifically in some cases affected by the pandemic. Now, I was then the Additional Chief Secretary of Labour Department. And I joined Labour Department in 2021. And so we had seen a year of horror. And all of you had seen that on TV screens. Some of you have probably been involved in some relief measures. When we had people out on the streets because they had nowhere to work and nowhere to live. If they have nowhere to work, they had nowhere to live as well. And that was the context in which I joined. But it gave me personally an advantage because everything that had been thrown at us had already been thrown at us, both by way of challenges of implementation and by the general criticism that we faced in the media, with the judiciary, with the public in general. So all those strains and constraints we knew, and I must make this clear that even in 2020, when we saw the worst in the beginning and all of us were overwhelmed, the Labour Department, which is the kind of umbrella department under which most workers come, even all other workers who are maybe working in the university, everybody comes under that broad ambit. It's a regulatory as well as a welfare department. Everybody has worked round the clock at that time, but we were overwhelmed. 2021, we were a little more prepared. And sociologically speaking, early 2021, which was when I got into the department, we had started seeing the steady trickle of the returning migrants. They were coming back from their native places, as you called it, basically because they needed to work. You need to work, and Bangalore is your place of work. And what I did as my first action, and this I do in some form or other whenever I'm transferred into a new department, that I try to familiarize myself with that context. And here the context was these workers. And so I met them and, we just chatted. And this is what they told me, that we had, they said they thanked us for, you had distributed cooked food, you had given us rations, you had arranged for the trains for us to go back. But what we need is work. And this is what they said, that now ಕೆಲಸಗಾರರು in Kannada, now ಕೆಲಸಗಾರರು ನಮಗೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಬೇಕು ಪಗಾರ ಬೇಕು. We are workers, we need work, we need wages. So that was the primary. Some time back in sociological discourse, we used to use the term felt needs. It's no longer in common use now. But that was the felt need at that time. And we kind of, I wouldn't say we thought out this conceptual framework a priori. This is not a research, exercise. We were in the situation. So this kind of idea was, the framework itself was post facto, but this was our thinking. So we said we would approach this in two ways. One was the policy, and the second is the practice, the actual implementation of it. And these two things were basically our two-pronged strategy to address what we call the migrant crisis. So when I say policy, what did we do? If you remember, the lockdown said lockdown everything. The first lockdown, workers would not stay, and construction would. And the bulk of workers are construction workers. There are others too, but the bulk of workers. And then the garment workers. These are the very large pockets of workers that we have. The state disaster management authority, they decided that we would allow in situ construction to continue. So when you make that decision, that means most workers work and live in situ. So they are working there and living there, which means that, immediately you are solving that issue of people being on the streets. And this was a promise that I made to myself, didn't dare to confess it to anyone else, but I said that my first priority will be that there should be no single worker on the streets. This was a promise I made to myself, and I'm glad that from day one to the end of my tenure, which also marked the end of my service in the IAS, not one migrant was on the streets in that entire 1 year period. Thank you. The credit goes to a lot of people who did a lot of work. But once the SDMA had said that in situ construction can continue, then people were off the streets, they were actually working. But this was a bold policy measure, but it also placed the onus on the department. Because if your people are working together and therefore living together, then the dangers of infection are higher. So what do? The first thing is that we started, awareness. That was one thing which we did. But from the medical side, continuous sanitization and fumigation of workplaces. And most industries took this responsibility. My own experience was that after that first overwhelming reaction to the pandemic and the lockdown, people kind of realized their responsibilities. Industries also realized that if you don't have workers and they don't come back, then you're going to be on shutdown mode for a very long time. Not lockdown, but shutdown mode. And therefore, many industries took the responsibility of fumigation and sanitizing their premises. And labor colonies and other places where, the industry did not step in, we stepped in and we did the work. Don't know whether I have, there's the fumigation and there's the vaccination also. We said we will take up the responsibility of vaccination, and we wanted to start with the construction workers, because that is the biggest cohort group of workers. Most of them, as one of you pointed out, they come from Bihar, and they do come from other parts of Karnataka like Bijapur. They are concentrated in Bangalore and Belagavi. Most of them come from outside, from either the northeast or from the North Indian states. Here we faced a very unexpected obstacle, and this is very peculiar because you will not think that here was government. Normally, bureaucrats are supposed to be the people with, who will not open the purse strings. But here we said that we will ask the private hospitals to, and we tried to, rope in a few hospitals to vaccinate the workers. But then the trade unions objected and said that this money, which we were going to spend, was actually the construction workers' money, in the sense that is a corpus built for their welfare measures. And when government has decided that they are going to give free vaccination, which was the policy at that time, if you recall, it kept changing, but at that particular point of time, government had said we will give free vaccination. So why do you want to spend our money or the workers' money for vaccinating? Let the government do. And I was actually personally, and so were my officers, we were terrified. Because if we cannot delay vaccination, and if we are waiting for government to give the funding, then it may take a very long time to finish the vaccination. These are huge, the number of workers runs to tens of lakhs. And but still, somehow we managed it, and the vaccine situation itself eased. When the course of this dialogue went up, the back and forth was going on, we had more vaccines coming into the market, into the state, and then we were able to start the vaccination process, which then went on. So you get, both support from odd places and objections from odd places, unexpected places. The other thing was the compensation. So here I told you that, this was the implementation part. That was the policy part, and the policy part and everything which it brought with it. In the implementation, the major decision that we took, in 2021, we already knew that distribution of cooked food didn't work. You prepare chapatis and give, and that man will say, ragi mudde is what I eat. You make ragi mudde, he'll say puri, and the food would get spoilt in the meanwhile. So it was 2020 had been quite difficult, because at that time we were trying to distribute food kits, cooked food. This time we said that in 2021 we decided that we will distribute rations, dry rations. And dry rations neatly packed was what we distributed to the workers in colonies, in the places of work, and wherever we could. We gave them to trade unions. Whoever could distribute, we asked them to distribute. And I must confess, since I am superannuated, I hope there would be no audit objection, but we are pretty liberal in doing so. So we had some kind of data, vague data as to how many workers are there. Let's just say in this particular district there are this many workers, and then somebody would call. This actually happened to me. One of the ministers called me and said, I want 50 more packets. I said, okay, straight away. Which was very different from, the approach which the PDS took. The public distribution system in Karnataka itself took a very, very different view, and, they were very worried that there would be, misuse of the PDS rations. But I thought that somebody is going to eat this food, so it doesn't matter. And, who is asking? The people's representative is asking for it. And so we were, we didn't splurge the rations. Again, we have trade unions acting as a natural check. But we were pretty liberal. If you were going to err, we erred on the side of inclusion rather than exclusion, insofar as the distribution was concerned. The other thing was cash compensation. And most bureaucrats hate compensation, cash, dealing in cash. If I left to my own devices, I would have liked to actually hand over physically cash, which we could not do. No, I didn't do it, so don't clap. We have too many constraints. But, the possibility of misuse is always there. But we used, direct benefits transfer, we call it. Direct release into bank accounts, which is what we did. And here, in the year 2020, washermen, one of you was speaking, Dr. Animesh was speaking about washermen, a very old tradition of washermen in Bangalore. So washermen and barbers had already been distributed 5,000 rupees in 2020. We expanded this and we said that we will distribute 3,000 rupees per worker to construction workers, and 2,000 rupees to unorganized workers. So, see, this whole business of migrants is not a terminology which is government speak. We look at categories of workers. And you'll ask me the question, why this discrepancy between the construction workers and the unorganized workers? And that is because money for the construction workers is part of a corpus that we collect in the course of, our normal workings. And we have a very large corpus. So it basically came from the department itself. And I could afford to be more generous. The other unorganized workers belong to a separate category, much, sympathized with category. The domestic workers, for example, fall under that broad unorganized net. And that money had to come from the state budget. I was prepared to give that from the construction workers' funds, but legally that Supreme Court does not allow that. Their fear being that, in a long run, not in this particular context, but there's a general instruction that, money of a certain category should not be used for another category of workers. So there's a long case about it and all that. We could not do that. Money had to come from state budget, which is why someone got 3,000 and someone got 2,000. But here, there was a kind of funny incident which took place. See, when we have discussions like these, I find that, those of us who are urban born and bred, we may be very sympathetic and understanding and all, but we don't realize that what we call urbanization is not something which is separate. It's not, the urban and the rural are not separate spaces. These are all people who come from the rural space, so-called, and then come into the cities and work. And there's no real urban transformation in the sense that we understand transformation. It is more a blend of rural ways of working into urban spaces of working. Right? So they bring those kind of information, and I find that, in public discourse of these kinds, we think, and I've seen this very frequently, that somebody would say there's a lot of information asymmetry. There is really no information asymmetry. There may be incomplete information, or sometimes something wrongly understood, or part information, but by and large, this is a very savvy class. Whether you call them migrants or workers as a whole, they have their own ways of getting information. They may not be able to open a website and access information. They may not be able to pick up a telephone, which Dr. Madhu may pick up a telephone and speak to the secretary to government. But they have, maybe the MLA's gunman, they have their neighbors, they have the lower level bureaucracy. These are the information sources. You will find that in your own home, if your maid would know what is happening in the, in the neighboring flat, but you would not. So they have their own ways. And the funny incident here was that when we decided, when it was in a meeting, the CM called a small group of officers. I was there, my commissioner was there, and the finance secretary was there, and a few others, the CM secretary. We had to decide on this quantum to be given and whether to give cash compensation. All that was discussed, and we decided on the amount 3,000, 2,000 and all. And at that time, I think there were maybe about 2 to 3 lakh unorganized workers in our database. Not a great database, but this was the registered number of workers. And so we just calculated that this would be the budgetary amount required. And I immediately told my colleague, who is the finance secretary, I said, the moment you announce this, your registration of workers is going to increase. And even within bureaucracy, the finance secretary, let it increase, it does not matter. I was still wary, and I told the chief minister, Mr. Yediyurappa is quite a scary person to talk to, because anytime he will lose his temper. But then I said, sir, this will happen, you must be prepared for this, your registrations will increase. He said, madli, ugly, parvagilla, corona, we'll give, let it increase it. So let the registrations increase. And believe it or not, what was 2 or 3 lakh workers became 21 lakh workers within a matter of weeks. The registration, this is their information system. CM just comes and makes one announcement. It is mostly reported in all the media, and in a matter of weeks. So it was great fun, because otherwise the unorganized board was, it's a very small board with a deputy director level officer managing it. And we were all saying that deputy director brought the mighty finance department to its knees, because this unexpected increase, and we did manage to get the money released to all of them. We also released sanitary kits. So we kind of racked our minds as to what would be most necessary. So food was one, sanitary kits. When we say sanitary kits, it was sanitizer, other kinds of cleaning agents, sanitary pads. These were the kind of things which we made into separate kits. That also we distributed, and there was cash compensation also. One thing which I already mentioned, we collaborated freely with anyone and everyone who wanted to collaborate with us. So that was NGOs, that was MLAs, that was the Karnataka State Legal Services Authority, which was started out very critically. I mean, they started out with this, that, you people are not doing anything, because that was, the general discourse at that time, and they became an ally, and then they said, we want to come and we will come. The members of the authority said, we will distribute along with you. So my officers were doing it, MLAs would come, and we never said that we never sought any publicity. I have this personal ethic that I don't want to benefit in any way from a calamity, not even by way of publicity. So all the work which we did was in terms of awareness creation. But there was no face to it that this or that. Even my minister, by and large, kept to that ethic. Though here and there, he couldn't help boasting. But he was so happy with the work, so he would say occasionally. But by and large, all of us kept to that. So whoever would come, we would say, yes, you participate in this exercise. Sometimes it was door to door. Sometimes we gathered people in a place, distributed. And of course, the money itself, the cash, went to the bank accounts. So that was one more. Then we had this not strictly migrants. This is interesting because this gentleman there who is holding a memorandum, he is Mr. Mahantesh, who is a trade union leader, very strongly allied to the Congress party, which is the principal opposition party. And he had also done some march and all, saying that we are not being protected. And then he came to give a list of demands. And the first thing he said that, he wanted a meeting, and so we had actually a formal meeting with him. He said, you've done very good work. So I said, Mahantesh, I'm going to put this on record. It will be part of the minutes of the meeting. He said, yes, you please put it in the record. It's still there as part of the minutes. It was quite creditable to be able to get, opposition allied union leader to actually praise your work. So this was that, and that is why I put that. In the hospitals, food was still distributed for people who were coming to vaccination. I think this particular thing was in an ESIS hospital, and the food came from ISKCON. These were the awareness creations. Many types of them. We used to send auto rickshaws to labor colonies to create awareness. These posters we put all over in newspapers as well as in all the colonies. What's happening? This was, this is not strictly migrant, but just as part of the... Oxygen was a very difficult thing, you remember that. And we had this awful experience, fortunately only once, when oxygen was coming from some part of, I think, Belgaum or somewhere. And every DC was desperate. Every district commissioner was desperate for oxygen. And Tumkur district commissioner stopped the oxygen cylinders and tried to divert them into his district. And then I had to send one officer. I had a ESIS hospital with some 25 odd patients who were, not needing oxygen at that time, but could need oxygen anytime. And so I sent an officer all the way to Tumkur to actually physically escort the oxygen tank. And then, he sent me this WhatsApp message saying, I'm coming to the hospital in 30 minutes. And, that was, it was a huge relief at that time. It was literally that, my breath and their breath were both hanging in the balance for some time. It's not strictly related to migrants, but... Okay, this is, the other part is that we said we will not stop with immediate relief. We have to build that resilience of the community as a whole to face such crises in future. And this is what the department continues to do even today. We started it at that time. That a few things we did is that we've concentrated on two sectors, health and education. We started mobile clinics, and these are still going around. My officers are still continuing. They, in fact, told me a few days ago that they've, some more have been initiated. These would conduct 21 diagnostic tests. It's a small van equipped with all diagnostic equipment, 2 nurses, 1 paramedical staff, and 1 driver who would go around to the colonies and to areas where workers are concentrated and, do the diagnostics tests, so as to detect not just COVID, but anything else early. So this was something which we started, which still continues. We also did a lot of things on the education front. Almost the entire education of workers is now subsidized. Some of it is completely free. Anything from SSLC to +2 to a BA degree, and then medicine. And if any worker's children gets admission in any of the national institutes, like IIMs or IITs or AIMS, then all the expenses, including the application fee, which is pretty expensive and a deterrent, even that is compensated. We also increased medical reimbursement. We enhanced it and we changed the policy to include COVID as part of the compensation package. So basically we said that, we will not stop with relief and say it is over when the pandemic is over. We should not have a recurrence of this kind of crisis, though there may be a recurrence, and now we learn that there are going to be more and more pandemics. Today I was watching a video which said that learn to live with pandemics. But our own resilience and the resilience of the communities that we serve, that can be enhanced and strengthened. So that is basically what we did. This, as I said, this is not migrants in the sense which we speak of. This is for the entire community of workers, because migrants as a category does not exist for the policymaker. For the policymaker, she or he is a client, just as any other client. A child is a client in a school. So this is the way we approached it in this particular context. So with this I'll close and we can. That's just a nice pic.
In a particular way. Well, in certain states it does not function also. In certain states it functions well. And one of the things we will always find Karnataka being mentioned, and of course Bangalore being mentioned, is that in spite of all the problems, we have a responsive government system, a bureaucratic system, and that makes a lot of difference. Well, that could be one differentiator. But there are definitely a lot of things which make Bangalore very unique. A go-to place, a place where we want to be, a place where we want to make our abodes, and a place where we want to make our careers, our futures. And of course, whatever my own ideological friends may say, there is always the fact that we are contributing to the city. We are owning the city, right? So from that perspective, may I ask the panelists to talk about what makes Bangalore unique or Bengaluru unique? What are the reasons which draw people so many times? And I'm just adding two small things here. See, unlike many other states, Karnataka is not a state which suffers from only having one hub. It's not like with due respect, the state I come from. It has many hubs. And in fact, Professor Kalpana was the founder, collector of Udupi, one of the places with highest per capita income, right? We have places like Mysore and so many places which have such good per capita, but still people are drawn. Almost 27% of the migrants we are talking about are drawn from rest of Karnataka. We have, of course, neighboring states contributing in a big number, and we have, as we were talking, the construction workers, a lot of them come from North India. That 15 lakh, if I'm not the figure, a bigger figure comes from. So what makes it so unique for the person who's coming perhaps as a push, that there is no livelihood available and that's why this industry is coming, and there is also a person coming out of pull. The fact is there is something lucrative, something nice about Bangalore. So what makes it so? So may I ask the panelists to comment on that? Maybe now this time we can start with Professor Madhu.
Janaki Nair's talk yesterday about what makes a city an ideal city, and we spoke a lot about Bangalore yesterday. And one of the things he said was, it's the blossoming of manyness. So many people blossom in a city. And we spoke about it's not just the buildings, the roads, the infra, it's the people that make the city, right? So the language, for example, I think this is one of the few cities in the country where you can survive with English and Hindi. I don't think although I'm a Tamilian by birth, I've never lived in Chennai, but I think it'll be impossible to go to Chennai and try to get by talking in Hindi. It would be very difficult. They would not respond to you, right? So language is one. The second I like about Bangalore, which I think has changed very recently, is also the weather. I used to love the Bangalore weather, but I don't know, suddenly I find it's a little bit more warmer. It's almost like being in Manipal. So leave that for some time. So weather is good. The third is business opportunities. I think there's a lot of startup, a lot of opportunities for people, employment. People do come to Bangalore. And the fourth is the sense of everybody can flourish here. It's, you're not in silos, you're not in groups. You can have the church, the mosque, the temple, the parish, whatever else it is, right? It can all beautifully function together. I don't know of many cities in India that can boast of that sort of cultural assimilation, if I should use that word like that. It's just a beautiful city. I mean, you can get something for 3 rupees and get something for 3,000 rupees. I mean,
Perhaps the same thing also.
yeah, exactly. Now just think about the construction workers that Kalpana spoke about. The one problem I think, Animesh, others, what does a challenge that migrants face is political exclusion. Because they do come in, from different cities, but I don't know whether they have much of a voice. So they probably tend to lose that. The other thing is cultural shock. For many people, Bangalore can be a cultural shock. It's a very, very, very cosmopolitan city. I mean, for people who come from very conservative backgrounds, perhaps, might think, wow, this is too forward a city. I don't know whether I'm right in that, but these are some of my observations. I remember the pubs, for example. There was a call that at some point the pub should close, 1 a.m. or something like that, right? Manipal is a very small town. Everything closes at 10:30. But if you come to Bangalore, you find this extremely broad appeal, many different people living, different languages, different food. And I think Bangaloreans love food, which is something you see hundreds of cafes. It almost reminds me of some parts of Europe when you go to little cafes. So to me, this is just a great city. But I'm sure Roman will have many more things to add. He'll probably go into suburbs and tell you which suburbs are worth living also. Thank you.
In the media, we want to propagate this idea of beautiful Bangalore, cosmopolitan Bangalore, loving Bangalore, full of love, blah, blah, blah. What we always forget, and as someone who's a historian, and I take pride in being that, Bangalore works today because of the amount of mistakes it's made in the past. And that's something that we do not ever take into account. This is one of the few cities in India that openly had ghettoism. Like, for example, if you went back into the early 60s, 50s, there were suburbs when Muslims wanted to move into Baswangudi, for example. They created a Mohammedan block and they were ghettoed in the Mohammedan block. We did things like that. Even when the British were in Bangalore at one point of time, at one point the Britishers felt that there were too many brown people around them and created Whitefield, which was an exclusive white area. And it was only, the browns could only live in Whitefield if they were workers. So we're a city that has made experiments and then seen that it has failed and then said, let's not do this again. We tried a planned suburb. Jayanagar was a planned suburb, heralded. If you look at the newspapers then, the kind of madness that the media portrayed about Jayanagar being the first planned suburb in India, they were comparing it to Chandigarh, they were comparing it to everything around the country. And then we realized planned localities in Bangalore, that plan may not necessarily work again. So Bangalore has had this beauty of experimenting with multiple styles, multiple things. For example, how many of you all know that Malleshwaram, for a very long time, was actually a place where lepers were thrown to kind of roam around the hills. And it was not even a city area for a very long time. The British used it as a dumping ground for people who had terminal diseases, who they didn't want mixing with the actual crowd and, infecting anyone else. And then later, when the Brahmins migrated from Tamil Nadu, which is why Malleshwaram was given to them, which is why there's such a huge population of Tambrams in Malleshwaram. So as a city, we've experimented with all kinds of things. Today, in 2023, we take all of these things with pride and we're like a cosmopolitan city. Every area has all kinds of people living there. But we have made mistakes in the past. And thankfully, we're the city that learned from it. Which is why today we don't have the ghetto culture in Bangalore. We do have it in pockets. I'm not saying we don't. You have your GM Palya, you have your Shivaji Nagar, you have your hardcore Hindu localities, you have your hardcore Christian localities. But as a planning commission, we're not ghettoizing the city anymore. Because we've learned that it doesn't work. We've learned that as a city, we work as a multicultural city. This whole thing of pub culture, I went through 3 generations of pub culture. When I was a young boy, when I was around 10, 15, Bangalore used to party till 4 o'clock in the morning. We didn't have a problem. And then we had a northeastern police commissioner who took over in Bangalore, and he brought in the curfew. Yeah, Mr. Sangliana, who a movie was made on later, all kinds of things. And it was so surprising that a person who came from a liberal culture like Mizoram came to Bangalore and said the only way to curb all the nonsense here is to block pub culture. And suddenly pubs were closed at 10 o'clock in Brigade Road and things like that. And now again, we're back to pubs being open to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Successive governments have taken different stands. At one time, we had Congress being very pro-liberalization. At one time, we had BJP being pro-liberalization. At one time, we had the Congress going super traditional. We had the BJP going super traditional. So we've never really had, a continuous thing of this idea that we assume Bangalore to be today. A lot of the Instagram posts that I see today are talking about, oh, the Chinese blossoms all over in Bangalore. Very few people even realize that that was a government directive. You will put this floral tree as the lining of your road, or we will not let you buy a house. And things like that. So a lot of it was planned. The idea that you celebrate and enjoy in Bangalore today is something that someone foresaw. Something that some particular planner, and they said, this is what I want the city to be. So a lot of it goes to the people who planned the city. A lot of it goes to the people who created these areas. And today when we celebrate Bangalore and the idea of Bangalore, you have to remember that it's an ever-growing city, it's an ever-growing culture. Tomorrow, 20 years from now, there was a question that I think you're going to ask us at some point, what is 2050 Bangalore? As a pure, proud Bangalorean, I don't know. I don't know what Bangalore is going to be in 2050. Because in the last 25 to 30 years that I've lived as a pure Bangalorean, proud Bangalorean, I've seen it change so many times. And I think, like how Mumbai has this resilience, where people will say, throw flood, throw bombing, throw terrorist attack at Mumbai, and they will jump back. Bangalore will also jump back. It's just that we'll take our time with it. So I think I'd like to stop with that.
Jump back, but we'll quietly sidle back. We do it in a very quiet way. But if I remember, Dr. Animesh spoke of Karnataka as a larger context, and I just want to bring the policy aspect of it, that there has been a conscious policy that we will develop different hubs. I'm speaking now from one side, that is the government side, that this regional disparity or imbalance, we call it in government speak, that was recognized for a very long time. State planning board, I don't know how many states have state planning boards at all, but we have had a state planning board, a rather quiet organization. It doesn't make big waves, but they bring out their reports. There have been, concentrated attempts to have industrial hubs in every part. You have in Hubli, you have in Mysore, and it's not the big industries that grow out of it. Electronic City is one big example where you have, the mega giants like Infosys and Wipro. But you have these smaller pockets where ancillary industries grow. And they supply. They supply material, they supply workers, they supply labor, to the larger industry. So one thing is that it is a matter of conscious government policy. The other thing is that it is also, and Udupi is a very good example of that, it is also conscious private investment and initiative, which is very unique. I mean, government initiative you can still see in some kind of imitative behavior is there across states. But private initiative coming, you cannot recognize, you travel through Manipal in the evenings, and then, it is not like a city of India or even Karnataka. It's like some other international city that you are somewhere in Geneva or sometimes better than that. It's so different, and I always take pride that look at all the other new districts. When Udupi was set up, there were 6 other districts. So 7 were set up at the same time. Udupi has just outstripped them all, and almost, I won't say 100%, there's always been a public-private partnership in a sense, but most of it is private initiative, particularly in health, particularly in education. There are 2 critical sectors where academic discourse says government should focus. That is where the private sector has focused and succeeded massively. And I, as a person and a bureaucrat, never recognize this public-private, binary. So let us use the word for lack of a better word. It really doesn't exist. We are all in it for India building. When you do this better, you do it. If I can do it better, or if we can do it better together, let us do it. And then the state allowed that expansion space. As you rightly pointed out, it is not always done, it's not always been a smooth path. It has been rocky at times. MI.l.a. itself has a long history of litigation with the government, but it has been done quietly. I would not come tomorrow that, I don't like Indian Express, I'll chop off your head. That doesn't happen. There is a quietness and a common decency, let us say, in the way things are done. So that, I think, is something unique. Not just to Bangalore, but I would say Karnataka as a whole.
Okay.
I think we should also look at
I think something that also makes Bangalore very different, again, I'm not sure whether you all are, Bangalore is a city of protests. It's actually very little right now. But the amount of protests that have happened in Bangalore from across, some of the funniest protests will ever happen in Bangalore that you might not have ever known. For example, one of the longest running protests 3 years ago was a whole bunch of elite Bangaloreans got together and protested a steel flyover being built. Just because they said, we don't want you to cut trees. And the government was completely, like, they had no understanding of why suddenly all these different people from different walks of life were out on the streets to protect a bunch of 300 trees. But they wanted to do it. And that's something that's very uniquely Bangalore for me, where a lot of people come together, they feel for something. I don't know if you all have been to Jayanagar side, the Ashoka Pillar. Yeah, Ashoka Pillar could have been made into a very snazzy thing, but there have been protests constantly with the government saying, do not touch that monument. Where many times they have tried to rebuild it, reconstruct it, make it a little bit more cooler, because a lot of the, there's a huge, I think it's an ideological, problem, but a lot of people feel that the south of Bangalore does not get as much attention as the central parts of Bangalore, the central business district. So at one point in time, the governments were trying to focus on making more public spaces, more identifiable public spaces, putting more statues, for example, in the south of Bangalore. You all know central business district is just strewn with statues. Sometimes statues go missing and we don't know where they've gone. That's actually happened. 3 statues are missing from Kaban Park and we don't know where they are. So that's something that's very Bangalore, where you have all of these things in one part of the city. So other parts of the city said, we also want our identity. And I remember there was a whole draft committee putting to, let's put Kannada poets, let's make statues all across JP Nagar, Jayanagar. And then the locals, who they thought they were trying to appease, said, no, you're not touching our Ashoka Pillar will remain our Ashoka Pillar. You will not change it. And so you've had things like this across the city where people are very protective about their areas. Metro lines have changed directions in Bangalore because local people have protested. A lot of young people who come to Bangalore today ask me a very passionate question, but why is there no metro in Koramangala? Because Koramangala connects half the city. And one of the reasons was Koramangala residents said they didn't want metro connection, and the government listened to them. So Bangalore is like that. It is about a place where people will go up to the government, will fight with their local representative and say, keep us a quiet place, we want to be a quiet place. Every year there are legal cases being put by private residents in Indiranagar relating to 12th Main, because a lot of local residents are like, too noisy. People are making too much noise. There are too many pubs here. There are too many those things here. And this is something that goes back and forth. And it's a very typical Bangalore thing, where it's a constant fight between one group of people and another group of people trying to say what defines Bangalore. And I think it's a nice juggle, but that's something that I think is very definitive of Bangalore too.
Just to add to this, to the opposite, the reverse example, so to say, I see this, that there is a protest culture. Again, that's done in a very decent way. They'll come, they'll stand, they'll protest, but there'll be no violence of any kind. Nobody will beat each other, and there's no hostility also. Leave alone the violence. There's not the internal hostility. It's for this particular purpose, and that's why we have come together. That kind of thing. But these are, the examples which you pointed out where the government took a step back. There are instances where the government did not take a step back. And one was a little older than your time, because I remember that Kaban Park, they wanted to build an M.l.a.'s hostel. I don't remember if you recall that, yeah. And then many Kaban Park users who walk in Kaban Park every morning, they came together, and Girish Karnad was one of them. And every day they'll come and stand in front of Kaban Park and say, please don't cut our trees, don't construct an M.l.a.'s hostel. But finally, it didn't work. Construction still went ahead, but with a compromise that there's still garden. Part of it has been made into a garden also. So there has been some kind of compromise there. The other very big thing was the Bangalore International Airport, where the whole of South Bangalore was up in arms, saying that we don't want this airport. Now that you have constructed it, and it came at the fag end when a few months before it was going to be inaugurated. They said, no, we'll continue with the HAL airport. And I don't know how many of you are old enough to have used the HAL airport. It's an awful airport to use for civilian purposes. It's a military airport. So, but then, there was a contractual agreement in place. And it is one of those rare instances in India where contractual governance kind of trumped popular governance. And the airport went ahead as planned. It was inaugurated. And now all of us have forgotten that it's so far. We just enjoy and of course, Mahe comes up so close to the airport that, we decided the green belt got relaxed, and you have a, whole crop of development, from that airport to all the way up to Electronic City now. And you still threaten that you'll go get an airport constructed in Hosur. That's, yeah. And the locals, most of the time, there's no local, non-local tiff in this. No, everybody, if those who have that idea or sympathize, who have similar thinking, they all come together in this. So there have been all this. But the thing is, it's never been hostile. I think that's something which is very special here.
So we are pretty mindful of the time, and I understand the constraints. We'll try to wind up fast. Just 2 or 3 quick questions. Please go ahead.
Full panel discussion on Bangalore City. My question is to ma'am. As an administrator, when you're talking about migrant labor, like when we are saying they are largely from northeast or northern parts of India, when policy or any program documents are bilingual, probably in Kannada and English, what was the major challenge that probably you have faced communicating that to the laborers or the labor migrant community, because they may not know the language that we speak, right? That's one of the questions that I have to you. And the second question I have to you is say, when we are talking about different programs and the budget, related to the budget for those programs, so you have labor department which has some educational programs, health programs. Similarly, other departments do have, right? So what's the major challenge that as an administration you might have faced in connecting between the departments, so that the benefit goes to everyone? Like probably there may be other schemes in other departments which are as beneficial for the migrant laborers, which they may not be knowing or they may not have access to. So I just want to know your views on the same. Thank you.
Regarding the language itself, one thing which we do is that what we did, at least from, I don't know I can't tell the past, but we started building a fresh data. You remember there was a lot of, finance minister made this remark saying, I don't have a data on migrants. So that was the time that, everybody jumped into the act. But we had already been at it, that, we already had a database. We wanted to digitize, refurbish that database. And this particular thing has a form, an online form which can also be printed, which is in English, which is in Kannada, and which is in Hindi. That was the simple way in which, if somebody has to enter their actual data. In real terms, what happens is that they work through agents. The groups of workers work through some kind of agent. It may be one of them, or it may be an outsider who does this facilitation for them. This happens. We call them, government functionaries hate middlemen, but I feel that middlemen are an essential part of the workings of any kind of, whether you're negotiating with between one entity and another, there would be a middleman of some kind. And these people, give them whatever name you will, still they do this useful function of, minimizing loss in translation. So this is one thing. What was your other question? Sorry.
About this one, coordination between the departments.
Coordination between departments. See, these are, of course, labor department is the umbrella department for labor, for instance. But then education department has schemes specifically tailored for children of migrant workers. They would, interdepartmental coordination is not a very hard thing in the usual, they would come to us, let us say that they want pockets, which are the labor colonies, we would give them. But I've also had very unpleasant experiences when data is not shared. For instance, when we had to distribute cash compensation, we had one rudimentary database, which, but what had been built up over the years, we had shared with the e-governance department, which was, Aadhaar tied. So it was a little easier for us. The e-governance, it was our own data, prepared by my officers long ago and shared. The e-governance department refused to allow us to use it for this purpose. So we just went ahead and said, okay, we'll just start fresh and make our own data. And it was not it's not as mammoth a task as one would have thought. I was worried. But then you have these wonderful trade unions, which are much maligned, but they are always they are on their toes. Workers keep them on their toes. And it was not so hard. I told you that, once you throw open the registration, these trade union activists go, they manage to tell people, and then groups of people, bulk registrations start getting done. So there are good experience and bad experience. And just one more thing, this was another odd thing that I faced, that there are many academic institutions in Bangalore which claim, Bangalore especially, but I suppose all over the country, which say that they do a lot of work in labor. But not one shared that data with us. And to tell the truth, except one or two, I also didn't go chasing. So that's also true. It's not that I simply didn't have the time. But since I am, for long associated with so many institutions, all of them claim that, we do work with labor. This was a national crisis, international, global crisis. Why not say, when your finance minister says that there's not enough data, why not say that I have some data? You may have a pocket of data. Why not just, give it, share it, and say that, use it if you will, but I have it. But I didn't find that. I think everybody sits and waits, let them ask. And that's true of all of us. We don't go forth. And
thank you for this panel. I like the variety of voices that came through. But as a scholar who works on migration and history of migration in Bangalore, one of the things that I've learned is that it matters whose voices we privilege, right? So from Dr. Kalpana, we heard the voice of the government during the pandemic. And from the two of you, we heard more personal voices of, as you say, being a pure, proud Bangalorean. I've also been brought up so I'll also start with something of an anecdote. I'm also been born and brought up in Bangalorean, but I wouldn't call myself a pure and proud one, but rather a critical one. And that comes from having engaged with NGOs, activist spaces, as well as a scholar of social sciences. So I think what's important to, so mine is more of a comment rather than a question. I think it's important to think of who we talk about as migrants, and I think Professor Animesh referred to that when he said that there is a class angle to when we talk about migrants, and Bangalore is not, as you somewhat generously put it, learned from its mistakes. I would disagree that it's learned from its mistakes, actually, but rather that it's that we're seeing many different kinds of contestations taking place, right? So we have, on the one hand, a very strong Kannada assertion taking place where we're not allowed, where there's protest if the Hindi language is put up in metro stations as to indicate directions, etc. And there's also a lot of I think from the last panel, what we learned is that there's also a certain kind of racialization taking place as well, right? So there is a lot of anger, resentment about North Indians, quote unquote North Indians, about Northeasterners, and I think we need to also recognize that when we talk about migration, there's also in the recent past been attacks against Northeast migrants, and there's been a wave of migrants going back, and there's a lot of this fake news that gets circulated on WhatsApp, etc. So I think perhaps when we think about Bangalore, what we probably need to think about how there are these perhaps, I don't know, these evil sides to the city as well. That of course the government also tries to combat some of that, and I think some of the work that the Karnataka government did during the pandemic is incredible, given the lack of data and ability to predict that we faced during the pandemic. But I think it's important to think about the dispossessed, about the marginalized, and about thinking about justice when we're thinking about migration. And these are all aspects that come when we look at people not like us, right? People who are not here in this space. So I think that's something that Professor Kalpana did bring, of course, when she was making her extensive presentation. But I think this talking a little bit more critically about Bangalore would be an entry point to thinking about migration as well.
Sure, please. Meanwhile, as Romal gets ready, thanks for bringing this out. Honestly, we are intruding on your time, honestly. So we are trying to limit it. But that's definitely was one of the important agendas as far as we were there. Given the paucity of time, we are limiting the things. But you're absolutely right. In fact, of those who are not aware of Professor Swati's work, she has worked on tenancy in Bangalore, which is a very interesting area. What happens when you are an outsider, you want to rent, and how has this historically been shaped? So I definitely would suggest, if you want to understand Bangalore better, there is no better way to see how an outsider has the first encounters, which is the tenancy encounters. Thank you. Yeah, please.
I was actually hoping to go into that. That was something that we really wanted to talk about. So as I said, and I would like to correct, I did not mean that we learned. I mean, we're learning. There's a big difference in that. My point is basically that we still haven't learned from many. I am part of the Northeast Solidarity Foundation, which worked a lot with the Northeastern people who were dispossessed of land and all kinds of things. And it's not just the Northeastern community. We are also ignoring the amount of violence against African nationals in Bangalore. That's not spoken about at all. There are so many communities that are targeted and increasingly targeted by other very specific communities. Yeah. This is something that I would not like to say something in the recent past. It's been happening for years. We've also had communities that could not kind of establish themselves in Bangalore even in the past, in the 80s and times before that, because certain other communities had a problem with them. The problem in Bangalore is largely, as I said, that there's always been some communities who identify as Bangaloreans, but some communities that identify as people who live in Bangalore and do not, kind of unshed their other identities. Like, for example, I'm completely aware of the fact that, so much so I was really shocked as a Northeastern myself, partly Northeastern. My Northeastern identity was put into question during the whole, attacks on the Northeasterns there. And I still remember I walked into Dupanhalli police station in Indiranagar, and they looked at my surname, and which is why I said I go by Laishram and Singh. And I was asked, which caste are you? That was the first question asked to me, and it took me more than half an hour to explain to them that I come from Manipur, where we don't have caste. We do have the Bengali Brahmins, but native Meiteis, we don't have a caste system. So I didn't know what to explain to this person. And so the police officer just decided, because I have a Singh, I'm Kshatriya. And so he just decided that all Manipuris henceforth are Kshatriya. Okay, it was very random, and I was very amused by the whole thing. It at least got the work done at that point of time, because a lot of these people were being brutally assaulted, and I needed to give them access. They needed safeguard, they needed safe homes. We were trying to get that through the police, and we managed to get it simply because the police felt they were Kshatriyas and therefore they deserved to be protected. So it worked in my benefit, but believe me, I was not comfortable with it at all. But that's the truth of the situation, that all our systems in place, it comes from where you come from. So maybe this cop was not from Bangalore, maybe he was not from here, maybe he was from a place where caste mattered a lot. But for him to jump into power and to actually, put his power there into play, he needed to identify who these people were and whether they were worth it to be saved, And that's the Bangalore we're talking about today. But it is romantic and it is very idyllic when I say that I came from a Bangalore that was not like that. And maybe I grew up like that. But I am fully aware of what's happening in Bangalore today. But I also feel that, like with all other cities, we need to understand that today's Bangalore population is not the Bangalore we romanticize. When people are romanticizing Bangalore, they're talking about a time when no traffic existed, when this was a pensioner's paradise. And these are ideals of utopia that will never come back to us. But these are ideals that people would like to build, build their sandcastles in, and let them do that. That's fine. But we have to be aware of the fact that Bangalore is changing today. There are a lot of communities that are dispossessed, misplaced, taken out, thrown out, not given space, not given representation, not given voice. And I think the more we identify as what is it that is Bangalorean, the more we can say, hey, this is a city that offers space, and we can fight for that. Now, when it comes to the nuanced thing about the whole anti-Hindi establishment that's happening right now, you have to understand it's political. A lot of Karnataka's politics have been with finding an enemy for a very long time. At one time it was the Tamil, at one time it was someone else. Today the enemy of the hour is the North Indian, who is coming here to steal jobs, who is pushing Hindi down everyone's throat. It's an easy villain. And I don't think it's a specific thing to Bangalore. Chennai went through this a decade ago. And today in Chennai, for example, we are actually, I just came from Chennai. I moved back to Bangalore on the 1st of April. I was in Chennai for 4 years. So I'm fully aware of how Chennai understood the whole Hindi issue and how they're slowly softening. On the other hand, you can go into Tamil Nadu, into a place like Trichy, where today you can talk Hindi on the streets in Trichy. It's cool to talk in Hindi in Trichy because it's full of, colleges and youngsters who want to talk Hindi. So I feel like when it is important to create an enemy, you create the most easiest enemy that everyone can identify with, and then you kind of push your politics against that. And I think that's what's happening with Hindi here. But also, let me not kind of make it such a simplistic thing. A lot of South India fighting against Hindi imposition is because of years and years of, government apathy towards local languages, because of years and years of people, like I myself, I hate to say this, but as someone who look at me and assume I'm North Indian or East Indian, I get misjudged to be a Bengali. Sometimes people think I'm all kinds of things. And there have been times where people have started talking to me in Hindi and telling me bad things about my own people, just assuming that I would be one of them and therefore I'd be okay with it, So I have seen the other side, and I'm not going to say it's faultless on both sides. I do agree targeting communities is not a solution in any way, but I often say that you have to understand where the politics comes from. And I feel like the whole of South is erupting towards that because of this, especially with the government in power right now, with this whole pushing of Hindi Divas becoming such a big thing all of a sudden. How many of you all even heard of Hindi Divas 10 years ago? Honestly, I did not. I did not hear about it till this government came into power. So, I think these are reactions to all of that. Bangalore still needs to learn a lot. But on the other side, it's also a city that is kind of loving. I don't think as a queer person, I have ever felt more safe in any other city. And I can say this about the trans community here also. Trans people will tell you the same thing. And they're from a different strata altogether. So it's not just me, urban, upper middle class, whatever. I know for a fact that the city, because of the fact that it doesn't have a traditional pulling like in Chennai, affords its people more affection and tolerance. And at least that's what I'd like to believe.
I'm not going to create further tensions and anxieties for the organizers. If there are any questions from audience, we'll take those questions and then we'll close.
Yes, just to add,
migrants.
Migrant 2050?
For migrants.
Wow. I'd love to visualize how 2050 will look like, but certainly I can, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm very, very new to Bangalore city, so perhaps my comments are very naive at times. But what I see of the city is certainly a city that's more tolerance. Certainly more tolerance. I've traveled around the world to the best cities in the world. I certainly think Bangalore has some special character. You guys know too much about the city than I would ever know. But I think in 2050 we will have a very resilient Bangalore. We'll have a Bangalore, Animesh didn't use the word inclusive, maybe for good reasons. I would like to use the word inclusive because it is an inclusive city. It allows all of us to, and just imagine we are sitting right here and we are having a very constructive conversation about what is Bangalore learning from its mistakes. We can do this in other cities also. I'm not saying we can't. Perhaps we can. But I think Bangaloreans and Bangalore as a city has got much more of an ear than perhaps other cities. So one of the things I love about the city is, Romal can correct me if I'm wrong, but I love the greenery. I love the trees. And I remember the Are colony when they were about to chop, Thackeray went and stood there and said, don't do it. I still think Bangalore has that very special love with environment. I hope we don't have more concrete jungles. We still continue to keep this beautiful greenery and fantastically inclusive dispossessed or people who don't have voices, their voices are continuing to be heard. That's the Bangalore I would love to see. May not be alive, but I would love to see that side of Bangalore continue. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot to apologies again for all the troubles I caused for you. Okay, special thanks for Professor Madhu, not just simply because we are colleagues. Well, it was a last moment. I just wanted to make sure somebody strong enough to talk about is there. In spite of having a lot of meetings and only in spite of having spent only 6 or 7 days here, he agreed to be a part of this panel. So my special thanks especially to Professor Madhu for this. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
For this thought-provoking panel discussion, let's give a huge round of applause for the entire team. It is time to honor the panelists and the moderator as a token of our gratitude and appreciation. Now I request Dr. Shilpa Kalyan, Head of Department of Liberal Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, to present a memento to Professor Madhu Veera Raghavan, the Pro Vice Chancellor of mi.l.a.p. Bengaluru. I request Mr. Romal Laisram to accept the memento. I request Dr. Animesh Bahadur to accept the memento. I would like to request Dr. Priya Shilpa Kalyan to present a memento to Dr. Kalpana Gopalan. Thank you all for joining and being part of this engaging discussion. I wish you all a very good afternoon. Thank you.